Good morning once again. Today's message is going to come out of the Gospel of Matthew, and we're in the 9th chapter, and we're going to look at verses 1 to 13. This is the story of the healing of the paralytic that comes down through the roof. We have that story in Mark's Gospel, but also it's talking about the call of Matthew. So with that, let's look at chapter 9, verses 1 to 13. And after getting into a boat, he crossed the sea and came to his own town. And just then some people were carrying a paralyzed man lying on a bed. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Take heart, son, your sins are forgiven." Then some of the scribes said to themselves, "This man is blaspheming." But Jesus, perceiving their thoughts, said, "Why do you think evil in your hearts? For which is easier to say, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Stand up and walk'? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he then said to the paralytic, "Stand up, take your bed, and go to your home." And he stood up and went to his home. When the crowd saw it, they were filled with awe, and they glorified God, who had given such authority to human beings. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came and were sitting with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners." Now here, it tells us that Jesus has crossed the sea. He had just got done dealing with the healing of the demon-possessed men in the tombs, and that's a little different than the demoniac in Mark's Gospel, because there's two people instead of one, but they still have the herd of swine. And he had calmed the seas, so he has calmed the storms. We already have a couple of different miracles just prior to this. But now he's back in Capernaum. He's back in his home base, where we believe that Jesus was kind of centralizing his ministry from. And in that town is where Peter lived, and that's where they believe they have found Peter's home. And when Gail and I were in Israel, we were able to go and see the house that they believe is Peter's home. So Jesus is back home. And in Mark's Gospel, this story is considerably more fleshed out, because there we learn that there's so many people trying to get into the house or into the house, and the house is not that big, is it? It's not a big place. It's not like we think about a big house. It's small. It's basically a one-room thing, and that's the house. More or less along the lines of like what we would know in this country is like the size of a log cabin. That's about what it was as far as size. But in Mark's Gospel, the house is filled. There's people outside. The people can't get in to see Jesus, and so they brought their friend on the stretcher, and so they do what? They crawl on the roof and they tear away some of the thatched roof, and they lower him in to be cured. And we have to wonder, why did Matthew not include that part? Well, I would suggest that tradition says that Peter himself dictated to John Mark what we have in Mark's Gospel, that this is Peter telling his young disciple what had happened. And it's Peter's house they took the roof off of, and so you would be quite honest to believe that Peter would be, "And they tore the roof off my house to put the guy down in there." And I can understand why he was upset, because you know what? The roof's still not there. When Gail and I saw it, it's not been put back yet. So that's a joke. So it would have had a big impact on Peter, and I'm sure that's why he would have shared that. But it's too bad we don't have it, because it shows what's going on with the people bringing him. They want their friend to be healed very, very desperately. They love this man, apparently, so much so that they're willing to take the risk of crawling on the roof and tearing the thatching away. And if it's just a thatched roof, I'm not sure I'd want to crawl up on a thatched roof. The chances of falling through that would seem kind of high. So when you've got probably 4 guys in a stretcher carrying a 5th, that seems a little precarious at best. So they really wanted very badly to get their friend before Jesus. And he's there before Jesus. In Matthew's gospel, we don't know. It sounds like he almost could have just walked up to him on the street. But he's there. And they want Jesus to heal him. Now, in Jesus' time, Jesus isn't the only itinerant preacher going around and healing people. This is something that happened. People went around and were perceived as healers. So they bring this man to Jesus to be healed. But instead, Jesus does what? He doesn't say, "Oh, you're healed, get up and walk." He says, "Your sins are forgiven." And that's the problem. That's why those that are hearing, the scribes, hear this and they're like, he's blaspheming. He's insulting God. He's putting himself in the place of God, for only God can forgive sins. Trust me, none of those other people that were going around as healers were going around and saying, "Oh, you're healed, and by the way, your sins are forgiven too." That's a bonus. 2 for 1. Buy one, get one free, BOGO, or whatever they say. No, they were saying that they had the power to heal, but none of them were claiming the power to forgive sin. But Jesus starts with forgiving the sin. And of course, then why would he do that? Why wouldn't he say, "Get up and walk. Oh, and by the way, your sins are forgiven"? No, because the whole part of Jesus' ministry, why is Jesus doing miracles at all? It's to show people that he is truly the Son of God, that he truly is incarnate, that he can do these things. He can bring people back to life. The other healers, trust me, were not doing that. That didn't happen. But here, he could have said, "You're healed," and the guy got up and walked away, and people would have said, "Well, he's really a great healer." And the whole part about forgiving the sins would have been lost. But Jesus is using the healing as the exclamation mark of the forgiveness of sins. I forgive your sins, and by the way, you're also healed. And so that it says here, but so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He said to the paralytic, "Stand up and take your bed and go to your home." It's the boom. It's to drive home that point. I am who I say I am. And just in case you missed it, here it is, so that you can see it. So that's an important part about that beginning. So let's talk about the call of Matthew. Now Matthew, as we all know, is a tax collector. And he's sitting there. Jesus walks by. And I haven't watched all of the movie Chosen, but I've seen the little snippet of where they call Matthew. I've seen that little snippet on various different things online. I need to watch that movie. I don't know, has anybody watched the whole thing? The Chosen? No. There's your assignment for this week. We all need to watch The Chosen this week. How's that? For our binge watching for this week, I don't know if it's on Netflix or where it's at. It's on YouTube, I think, actually. Which is part of why we haven't watched it, because I don't think it's on Netflix. But at any rate, Jesus is walking by. He sees this tax collector, and he turns to him and says, simply, "Follow me." And Matthew does the logical thing, doesn't he? Totally logical. He gets up and goes, right? He just says, and he got up and followed him. That's all it says. Pretty simple, right? Well, it wouldn't have been simple at all. Because Matthew is a tax collector. He's also Jewish. So he is, of course, as we all know, very much reviled by all of the Jews. He's also reviled by the Romans, too, by the way, because he's not Roman, he's Jewish, and so they didn't think much of him either. He's just convenient for them. They need somebody that can speak the language well and knows the culture and knows where people live and all of that. So he's a convenience to them. But he's a collaborator. And the thing that we have to remember also about this, that I don't think it gets mentioned very often, if at all, it gets mentioned, but I don't know that it gets mentioned in the context of what's going on here and how of a stunning change of heart this is for him, and as well as for Zacchaeus as well. Though Zacchaeus doesn't just leave his tax collecting behind, does he? We don't know that. Matthew does. But when the tax collectors are given their areas, you might have a main tax collector. Now Zacchaeus was a main tax collector, so he was obviously a very wealthy man. But those main tax collectors would then farm out to other people, also people with means, because what you had to do when you were given this area to be the tax collector, you up front had to pay the Romans for all the taxes for that area. They didn't wait to get theirs. They didn't send you out to collect. Because by golly, you might not be really inspired to collect, mightn't you? But if you had to pay it up front, you need to go out there and recoup your losses. And by the way, you also want to make a profit, don't they? So they're charging extra. They didn't really have a limit on them as far as that, per se. So Zacchaeus would have been a main tax collector. Under him would have been lesser. He would have hired sergeants, basically. But, oh, by the way, you have this area, and that's the taxes for that area, so you pay me. And now you go collect. So Matthew is one of these tax collectors. Matthew's got skin in the game, as they say. He's already paid the taxes for this area out of his own pocket. Matthew, unlike the others, must have been a man of some means, because he was able to be a tax collector. The others are fishermen, mostly, that we know of their vocations. And they wouldn't be necessarily people of great wealth. They might have some means. They have a fishing business, but Matthew must have had some means. And think about this. When he walked away from that tax booth, what did that mean? Well, you're fired now, right? The Romans are like, what? We're going to give that job to another person, which means you're no longer the tax collector, which means you no longer have the authority of Rome to go out and collect taxes, which means you can't go back out and recoup what you've already given to the Romans or to the main tax collector, like someone like Zacchaeus. You don't have that power anymore to go back and recoup what you've invested. So he's not only investing all that he's got from the time forward, he's investing what he's already paid in everybody else's taxes. And I don't think everybody ever thinks of that. The sacrifice that Matthew's making here. It's not like, he got up and followed him. Big deal. He got up and left everything behind. He couldn't go back and become a tax collector. He couldn't go back and recoup all that money that he's already given to the Romans. He's out all of that. But he is all in with Jesus. And he seems to be quite devout. And he obviously, as a man of means, he's probably one of the more educated as well as the more affluent of the followers. It's an interesting thing to think about who Matthew is and what he's given up. You can't go back to that old life. And by the way, when you become a tax collector, guess who not only gets shunned by the Jewish people besides yourself? Your whole family gets shunned because you've got a tax collector in the family. It's rather like what's going on now with the officer down in Atlanta. His stepmother got fired from her job just because she simply was his stepmother. I think it was my stepmother, wasn't it? Or was it mother? Stepmother. Just because you're related to the guy, you're shunned too. And that would be exactly the fate of Matthew's family. They would have been shunned. They wouldn't have been allowed in the synagogue. They probably were allowed in the court of the Gentiles, because even a Gentile could get into the court of the Gentiles. But they wouldn't get any further than that in the temple. Unlike Jesus, who could go pretty much everywhere except for the Holy of Holies in the temple, Matthew would have had to stay behind because the Jews wouldn't let him in there because he's even more reviled than Jesus is. So we don't think often enough about who he is. And Jesus then, now when it says in the house, sometimes this gets looked at as though, well, they must have gone to Matthew's house. Well, I don't know. It's in the house doesn't really give me any indication. I would guess it's probably more that they've gone to Peter's house. But Matthew's so enthused about this guy that got up and followed him, so simple as that. He's so enthused that he's done what? He's gone and gotten his friends, tax collectors and sinners. We don't know what that is. I mean, it's people that have broken the law, not obeyed the law, that have been rejected by the synagogue and the temple, perhaps, but We don't know exactly what that is. We can't really flesh that out. We don't know. It could be prostitutes. It could be who knows what. But other tax collectors. He's compounded the whole problem for Jesus of bringing more tax collectors. But what kind of a story must he be telling these other tax collectors about Jesus? What is he sharing? I want to know what he's sharing with them to get them so excited that they're willing to go and sit and even listen to this Jesus guy. Because guess what they're going to do too if they leave their tax booth? They've done just exactly what Matthew did. They've left all of it behind. And just because you leave that tax booth behind didn't mean you all of a sudden got in good with either. You certainly aren't any better with the Romans. They're going to despise you even more. And the Jews are not going to forgive you and just all of a sudden think you're wonderful, are they? You're still a collaborator. You're still that guy that was helping the Romans, no matter what you do after that. So think about that. What is the story? What is what he's telling them? What is his message, I should say, about that he's sharing with those men about Jesus? And I'm not trying to be sexist there, but in that time, age and time, the tax collectors would have been men. But what is he sharing with those guys? What's he telling them? That they're willing to go and sit with Jesus. And we always focus on how stunning it is that Jesus would meet with them. But how stunning it is that they would meet with him. How compelling is that story? It's such a compelling story that guess what? 2,000 years later, we're still telling it, aren't we? We're still hopefully living it as we go about and live our lives. We're going to learn what it means when we say, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have come to call not the righteous, but the sinners. And in verse 13 there where it says, go and learn. That's a very common instruction from a rabbi. When someone would come and ask them, they might give them a short little snippet of a question or an answer, and then they say, go and learn. And that means go and read the Torah. Go and find it for yourself. Because a great teacher doesn't always give you all the answers. He tells you, or she, they tell you how to find the answers, and then they want you to go and find it for yourself. Because that's really how you learn the most. So we need to go and try to learn what it means when we are being merciful, when we're truly sacrificing the way that Matthew sacrificed. He gave up what little all he had left was basically money in this world, and he just walked away from it. What does it mean to sacrifice like that? What does it mean when Jesus comes, not for the righteous, but for the sinners? And there we need to be saying, praise God, because guess what? We're all fallen. We're all the sinners. None of us lives up to that. And we all need to be thankful because we talked about in Genesis about Abram, that God was going to raise up a nation from him, nations from him. We're all part of that thing. We're not Jewish. I don't think there's anybody here with too much Jewish blood. If we do, it's pretty diluted. So we are part of that great nations that God promised Abram, and the promise came true through Christ. So praise God. And so with that, I'm just going to say, go and learn. Read your Bibles. Bill told me he's been reading the Bible a lot, so I'm going to be in trouble after all this, because Bill's going to know it. Front to back and back to front, right? I always am amazed at the people that do have things like that completely memorized. It's crazy to think there are people that have the entirety of the Bible memorized. I don't know how in the world you can do that. But go and learn. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so very much for the message of sacrifice that Matthew gave. It is an example for us. It's one that we pass over so easily when we simplify what it means when he got up and followed you. There's so much more to it than that. And forgive us that we don't think about that, we don't realize that we don't emulate that, and we don't follow that, and that we don't do it ourselves. So when we want to just we follow Jesus, but we keep everything the same. Matthew's life was completely different. He even got a different name. Thank you, Lord. Amen.